The Jalen Hurts disrespect makes no sense. This guy's been to two Super Bowls in the past 3 years and performed amazing in both of them, and he's still barely considered a top 10 quarterback. And the way I rank players is I like to look at the last 3 years and evaluate how good they've been over that 3 year course. Like a guy like Aaron Rodgers, obviously he moves down everybody's list. Like all the time he's still great. But over like when it comes to current rankings, he hasn't done nothing. In the last 4 years ago he won MVP, but the last three seasons he had following that MVP year, he wasn't amazing and he wasn't able to replicate that. Then he had the injury with the Jets. Then he had this season with the Jets. And the injury season, I'm counting that because the best ability is availability. And if you're not available, then you're just hurting your team. And while you're not available, guys other that gives other guys the opportunity to step up. Which is why we move up certain guys. But back to Jalen Hurts. Let's start in 2020. Let's start from his rookie season. So, or we can actually let's not start there. Jalen Hurts, a two-time Pro Bowler. Obviously, the Pro Bowl don't really mean nothing now, but he hasn't played in. I think he played in the one he made last year, but he was named the Pro Bowler back-to-back years in 2022 and 2023. Just became a Super Bowl champion and won a Super Bowl MVP. Finished runner-up in MVP in 2022. But going to 2020, he went 1-3 as a starter. Carson Wentz went 3-8-1. Wasn't great that year. That was a really bad year for Carson Wentz, so he had to bench him. We put in Hurts. He went 1-3. The one win was against the Saints. I remember that game because it's the Saints, and that was a phenomenal game that Hurts had. But under Hurts in his rookie season, the Eagles went 1-3. Hurts had a 52% completion percentage, had 1,061 yards, 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, had a 33.8 QBR, 77.6 quarterback rate, had 63 carries for 354 yards and 3 touchdowns. That was all in his rookie year. So we've seen flashes that he can be a pretty good dual threat. Obviously, the interceptions we're gonna have to calm down, because you can't have a pass to interception, touchdown to interception ratio like that. So in 2020, it was just about him showing flashes. So then in 2021, and then let me read off this 2020 roster and some of these guys that are on the team. Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz, old Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey was old, Quez Watkins, Jalen Rager, who was a high pick for us, who ended up not being that great. But then you get to 2021, where Hurts is the full-time starter, and you have Devontae Smith, who we just drafted. You still got Miles Sanders, Dallas Goedert, Quez Watkins, Kenneth Gainwell, Boston Scott, and Zach Ertz. Pretty decent roster, and Jalen Hurts was good enough to lead his team to the playoffs. They went 9-8 that season. They went 8-7 when Hurts played, and they were 1-1 without Hurts. So they had, in the 2 games he missed, the Eagles had a 500 record. And Jalen Hurts is really valuable to the Eagles' success. Like throughout his career, it's been hard for them to win games without Jalen Hurts. So he had a 61.3 completion percentage, 3,144 yards, 16 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 87.2 quarterback rate, 68.3 QBR, 139 carries, 784 yards, and 10 touchdowns. So as you see, the quarterback rate and the QBR and the rate both went up. And then the numbers improved as he became a full-time starter. Like, he just became a better player. He became more of a dual threat. Like, this was really, for him, starting from start to finish of the season, that was a good season for Jalen Hurts because we still didn't know what he was and what he can be. Obviously, he's not a great quarterback under pressure, but there's quarterbacks that struggle. Every quarterback has something that they struggle with, which I'm going to get into later in the video. And then the Eagles led them to the playoffs when they weren't expected to be a playoff team. This team, like I said, it was a decent team, but they weren't expected to be near the playoffs that season. They lost to the Buccaneers 31-15 in the wild card, a game where Hurts went 23 of 43, had 258 yards, a touchdown, 2 picks, took 2 sacks, had 8 carries for 39 yards. And he wasn't great in that game. The numbers, they looked good, but he wasn't amazing. I remember that game, and he didn't do anything until the fourth quarter. That's when they put up all 15 of those points, because that game was 31-0 for a lot of it. The Eagles were shut out through 3 quarters in that game. But so he had some garbage time touchdowns, but we've seen it with Dak Prescott in the game against the Packers. We seen it in the Super Bowl with Mahomes the other night. So it's like these quarterbacks, they do stat pad, especially in the playoff games, because they're gonna want their numbers to look better. Not making an excuse for them losing, but we've seen it with other quarterbacks stat padding. But then in 2022 was when uh, the Eagles had their best season since they last went to the Super Bowl, and this was Jalen Hurts' best season in his career so far. The Eagles went 14-3 that season. When Jalen Hurts played, they were 14-1, and Jalen Hurts was out 2 weeks because of an injury, ankle injury. They went 0-2 in both of those games without him. Now it didn't matter because the Eagles were still able to get the first seed, but Hurts that year a 66.5 completion percentage, highest of his career, 3,701 yards, best of his career, 22 passing touchdowns, best of his career, 6 interceptions. Now that's higher than what he had in his rookie year, but the rate that he did it with, that's still very impressive because he did that in 15 games when he threw 4 games in his first season. 101 rate, highest of his career, a 68.3 QBR. Wasn't the best of his career. Now that tied his best, which was the same in 2021. Had 165 carries, 760 yards, and 13 touchdowns. Like I said, Jalen Hurts would eventually develop into one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the league, and he did that. And then also with this team, the only difference with the 2022 team is that you still had Miles Sanders, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, Boston Scott, and Quez Watkins. The only difference is that you added A.J. Brown to the mix. And good organizations build around their star players, and they get players to win championships. You're not winning a championship with a bad team. That logic is dumb. Like trying to use help to dispute how good Jalen Hurts is, that's stupid. Because Patrick Mahomes had Travis Kelce, he had Tyreek Hill. He even won 2 championships without Tyreek Hill. Tom Brady had Randy Moss. They went undefeated. They lost to the Giants. Tom Brady had Gronk, who was considered one of the greatest tight ends ever. So you had to put talent around your players for them to win. So that's the stupid argument that people try to make to discredit Jalen Hurts. Well, the offensive line is so good. Oh, you got Saquon Barkley now. But we've seen him have success with guys like Miles Sanders and Boston Scott as his running backs 1 and 2. Like they were in this 2022 season, which I'm not done talking about. They got to the Super Bowl with Miles Sanders as the running back 1, who we obviously seen isn't that great. We've seen him after he left the Eagles and went to the Panthers. It exposed how good Miles Sanders really was. The Eagles beat the Giants 38-7. Jalen Hurts went 16-24, had 154 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 112.2 rate, 9 carries, 34 yards, and a rushing touchdown. He was phenomenal in that game. After the third quarter, he didn't have to do anything because that's how dominant the Eagles were, and that's how great Jalen Hurts played. You might look at 154 and think, oh, that's not a great game. But if you actually watched it, you don't have to throw for the most yards. It's about you being efficient, being able to get the ball downfield, and being able to put touchdowns on the board. Whether it's through rushing or passing the ball, he was able to get 2 of them, and the Eagles dominated the Giants. And they had a first round bye too. So then you move to the conference championship. They dominated the 49ers 31-7. Hurts 15-25, 121 yards, 11 carries, 39 yards, and a rushing touchdown. Able to dominate the 49ers. Had a really great game. Oh, he just threw 121 yards. You don't have to throw for the most yards to win a game. The Bills won a game by just passing the ball 3 times one time. And that was in a regular season game. I know, but it still happens. Like, you don't have to have the most passing yards to win a game. You can dominate in other fashions. And even if you're not, like, statistically a 300-yard game, you don't have to throw 300 yards to win every time. Like, the games where Hurts throws for more than 40 passes, they're likely losing that game. Because a quarterback shouldn't be passing that many times, especially a guy like Hurts, who's able to dominate through the run game, and he's improved as a passer. His vision has gotten better year by year. Then you get to the Super Bowl, they lose by 3 to the Chiefs, and why did they lose? Because Jalen Hurts made one mistake, which was the fumble he had. But in that game, he was 27-38, threw for 304 yards, had a touchdown, 15 carries, and 70 yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. He had 4 total touchdowns, and he outplayed Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. But he made one crucial mistake, which is having that fumble. And one mistake against the Patrick Mahomes team could cost you the entire game. That's just the truth of the matter. And that was the case in that game. but he still played phenomenal. And you couldn't, like, people talked about how great Jalen Hurts was in that game. Like, if he doesn't have that fumble, that game is probably completely different because it happened in the second quarter. So, like I said, he's able to read the field better. It improves each year. So from 2020 to 2022, he continues to improve. Then you had a 2023 season, which was last year. And was the season great? No, but it was still a good season. He had the Eagles won 11-6. They obviously should have been better, and they should have finished the season better. They took some bad losses. They lost 5 of their last 6. But he had a 65.4 completion percentage, 3,858 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, 89.1 rate, 60.1 QBR, 157 carries, 605 yards, 15 touchdowns. Like I said, he's still an elite dual threat quarterback. Like he did have a lot of interceptions, which wasn't great, didn't look great. But even 11-6, that was good enough to get them a wild card game, and he was still able to win games. Like Jalen Hurts is a clutch quarterback, he has the clutch factor. And there's some other guys I'm gonna compare him to later. And then in the game against the Bucks, no, he wasn't great in the playoff game. And Ty Bowles has Jalen Hurts' number. Ty Bowles knows how to game plan against Jalen Hurts. That's the one team that Jalen Hurts cannot beat. He went 25 of 35, threw for 250 yards, had a touchdown, and took 3 sacks in that game. He didn't play great. But aside from, and then when you look at the 2023 roster that they had around them, you still had A.J. Smith and Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, but you also brought in DeAndre Swift to replace Miles Sanders. And DeAndre Swift, he isn't as good as Miles Sanders. I mean, even in that offense, like Miles Sanders was better than DeAndre Swift was. And you still had Gainwell, Dallas Goedert. You had a aging Julio Jones, had Olamide Zaccheaus, who that's when he made his name and was able to go to the Commanders. You had Quez Watkins still. So it's not like the roster was amazing and you downgraded as far as running backs go. But I do think the Eagles should have been better this season. But when you look at Hurts, his first 4 years, I mean, he was pretty good in his first 4 years in the league. I mean, obviously 2020, he just showed flashes, but then 2021 was a good season. 2022 was a phenomenal season. He finished second in MVP that year, and it was a real case for him to get MVP over Patrick Mahomes. Then in 2023, it was a down year, but he still showed that he's been able to read the field better. Obviously, the game against the Jets, I didn't forget that. That's the only AFC team he's lost to. That game in the last 2 years, that's the only AFC team he had lost to. So that was bad. But then you have this season, 2024, goes 12-3. The Eagles finished 14-3. They were finally able to win games without Jalen Hurts this year. They went 2-1 without him. And we can talk about the roster. You had Saquon Barkley, A.J. Smith, Dallas Goedert, Jahan Dotson, Kenneth Gainwell, Will Shipley. And I mentioned Will Shipley because people are like, oh, the offensive line is so good, this and that. But if you haven't watched college football, you won't understand how great Will Shipley was at Clemson. And we saw it in the playoffs and the Commanders game and how great he really was. But this season, Jalen Hurts, 68.7 completion percentage, 2,903 yards, 18 passing touchdowns, only 5 interceptions, 150 carries, 630 yards, 14 touchdowns. The playoff game against the Packers goes, the Eagles win 22-10. The Packers go 13. Jalen Hurts goes 13-21 for 131 yards, 2 touchdowns, only takes 2 sacks, 6 carries and 36 yards, and he outplays Jordan Love, the quarterback on the other side. Jalen Hurts might not have had the most phenomenal game where he's thrown for 200 yards, but he was really great that game and was able to get the Eagles to a win. Now, I'm not taking away anything Saquon did, and the Saquon disrespect is kind of crazy too, because he's hit 1,000 yards multiple times before on the Giants. He's did it 3 or 4 times, if I'm not mistaken. If it wasn't for that, in that other season he had 900 yards, but he's hit 1,000 yards before. So now he has the most scrimmage yards all time. It's just because of how good the Eagles' offensive line is. No, that's a lie. Obviously, you're going to be better with a better offensive line, but Saquon Barkley he's been elite in the past before, and he just seen it on another level this season. Now in the Rams game was the only game where Jalen Hurts took more than 2 sacks in the playoffs this season. He took 7, and the Rams have a really great D-line, so I can't take that away from him. Jared Verse won Defensive Rookie of the Year, so he deserved that. But the Eagles were able to win 28-22. Jalen Hurts went 15 to 20, had 128 yards, 7 carries, 70 yards, and a touchdown. So Jalen Hurts, like I said, not throwing for 200 yards, but he knows how to win games. He's getting the wins, and wins always matter for other quarterbacks. But when it's about Jalen Hurts, it's because his team's so good that we can't do that. When other guys, you have to build a good team to win. Okay, conference championship. The Eagles play the Commanders. The Eagles win 55-23. Jalen Hurts goes 20 of 28, throws for 246 yards, has 1 touchdown, takes 2 sacks, and had 3 rushing touchdowns. He had a total of 4 touchdowns, and he outplayed Jaden Daniels in that game. And that wasn't the first time this season that he outplayed Jaden Daniels. Then in the Super Bowl, the Eagles win. They win it pretty easily, 40-22. The refs didn't play no factor into this game. Hurts went 17 to 22, 221 yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception. Only took 2 sacks, 11 carries, 72 yards, 1 touchdown, no fumbles. He was phenomenal in that game and won Super Bowl MVP, deservingly so. I mean, until it would have been Cooper DeJean's of Super Bowl MVP until that dagger to Devontae Smith to basically end the game. So it's like, it's always been these conversations. Can he throw the ball deep downfield? Can he do this and that? Well, he did that in the Super Bowl multiple times, and he still gets discredited for it because of the help that he has surrounding him. With Tom Brady win without help, you got to have a good defense and special teams to win. If Tom Brady doesn't have a good enough kicker to win the game on some field goals, then the team don't win. They don't make any type of sense to me. Tom Brady's played with Gronk and Randy Moss, 2 of the greatest ever at their positions. Mahomes had Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. Josh Allen, he had Stephon Diggs at one point. So it's like, it don't make sense that we're talking about help when you're not winning with a bad team. That don't make any sense. So to try to discredit Hurts, and then the guys that people want to put ahead of Jalen Hurts doesn't make any type of sense to me. Jaden Daniels, he had a phenomenal rookie season. I'm not taking that away from him. Led the Commanders to their best season since 1991. But out of the 3 Commanders and Eagles matchups, the Eagles came out on top twice. The one game they lost, Jalen Hurts went out with an injury. The 2 games they won, both in Philadelphia, Hurts was healthy for both of them, and he outplayed Jaden Daniels in both of those games, leading the Eagles to wins. And you can say, well, they had the drops, they had this and that. Okay, Lamar Jackson had a situation where his players had drops, but Lamar Jackson still got the blame for it because he's a quarterback. You can't pick and choose when you want to blame the quarterback. And on the Commanders losing wasn't on Jaden Daniels, but Jalen Hurts did play better than him. If you watch the game, Jalen Hurts was the better quarterback, and he is the better dual threat. So it's hard, and like I said, I rank based on 3 years, so you have to show some consistency too. So if Jaden Daniels has a bad season next year, then it's kind of hard, and he's definitely moving down the list of top quarterbacks in the league. It's hard to be like, well, Jaden Daniels had such a phenomenal season, he's better than Hurts. But the 3 times that they played, Jalen Hurts outperformed him twice, and the one time that he didn't, he got hurt. Are we not watching the games? Are we not using our brains when talking about this? Another guy, Matthew Stafford. And Matthew Stafford is a Super Bowl winning quarterback, so I respect that. But since he's won that Super Bowl, he hasn't been the same. He hasn't played at that level that he did the year that he won the championship. And many other things could factor into that. But if you want to factor in other things like injuries, who left, who didn't, you have to do that with every quarterback. Because Patrick Mahomes won back-to-back Super Bowls without Tyreek Hill. Josh Allen got to the AFC Championship without having Stephon Diggs. And they lost the game, but he still got there without having Stephon Diggs. Joe Burrow, the defense was really trash this year, but him and Jamar Chase went off. They weren't able to get to the playoffs. So it's like a lot of things play factors on different teams, so you can't blame the Eagles for building around Jalen Hurts and building a great team. So like I said, Matthew Stafford, in these last 3 years, Jalen Hurts has been better. Out of these 5 seasons that I'm looking at of Jalen Hurts' career, and I'm telling you, I'm taking 3 of them. That'll limit. So you take out 2020 and 2021 out of the occasion. Jalen Hurts has been to 2 Super Bowls in the last 3 years. It's finished a runner-up in MVP. Outperformed Patrick Mahomes twice. had two really good playoff runs, and he's been to the playoffs 4 times out of his 5 seasons. And the 2 years that he lost, they were in the first round to the Buccaneers, and every team, every quarterback has their kryptonite. Tom Brady wasn't able to beat the Giants in the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes hasn't been able, he couldn't beat Tom Brady when they matched up. The 2 times they did, went 0-2 against Tom Brady. Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts are now both 1-1 against Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. And CJ Stroud, he had a great season, but he has not had the playoff run that Jalen Hurts has went on. These last 2 years, Jalen Hurts has still been the better quarterback between the two. You can't put CJ Stroud over him when he hasn't uh, led his team, when he had this type of season that Jalen Hurts has had. CJ Stroud didn't finish runner-up in MVP this past season. Even his rookie season, he had a good first round in the against the Browns, if I'm not mistaken. But then when they played the Ravens, he got embarrassed in that game. Jordan Love, and I think Jordan Love is a good quarterback, but in his first season, his first full season starting, which was last year, he only had 2 interceptions, and he had the upset win against the Cowboys. And that was a great 2 games that he had. But then this season against the Eagles, Jalen Hurts clearly outperformed him in both games that they had this year. And the second game they had this year, which was in the playoffs, Jordan Love threw 3 picks, more than he threw in the last year's playoff alone in 2 games. So it's like Jordan Love is not on Jalen Hurts' level. If Jordan Love was like that, his team wouldn't have lost by 12 points to the Eagles. He wouldn't have threw 3 interceptions in a game, in the most important game of the season. And he's also had to deal with injuries. He's been injured early on in the season. So like I said, the best ability is availability. And Jordan Love, he started on the bench in his career, been in the league for 4 years, and he's only started full time 2 of those years. But you can't put him and Jalen Hurts in the same conversation, because Jalen Hurts is a playoff riser. We haven't seen, it's not, Jalen Hurts is a better playoff performer than Lamar Jackson is, but Lamar Jackson is a 2-time MVP, and he's been better in the regular season, and he still had some solid playoff games. So obviously Lamar Jackson is still the better quarterback, but certain guys are just not on Jalen Hurts' level. Then the one that really doesn't make sense is Justin Herbert. Okay, Justin Herbert is more talented. You want to know who's one of the most talented NBA players of all time? Tracy McGrady. Does that make him a top 10 player all time? No. And I use Tracy McGrady because he's a great player, but he's not top 10 all time based off of talent. Tracy McGrady is probably more talented than Jokic is, but Jokic is the better player. Y'all don't understand the difference between talent and just purely being better. Like Jokic, he's been more successful. He's been able to get his team more wins. He's been more versatile. He has the playmaking, he has the rebounding, he can score. He can do a lot of different stuff, but it's not fancy. It doesn't show. Some of the stuff he does has to show up on the stat sheet. But Tracy McGrady is more talented. But most people are probably ranking Jokic higher all time, and he's also won multiple MVPs and won a championship. But Justin Herbert, like I said, he's more talented, but he's not the better quarterback than Jalen Hurts. Justin Herbert is 0-2 in the playoffs. The 27-0 game against the Chargers, against the Jaguars, the Chargers lost. And not all that is on Herbert, but he wasn't good in that game. He's not been good in the playoffs. He had a really bad showing. The second half, he completely flopped, and he had a terrible showing in the second half, and they ended up losing. And they still had a chance to win that game, and he wasn't able to get the win. He threw multiple interceptions in that game. Then the game against the Texans this year, C.J. Stroud clearly outperformed Justin Herbert, and Justin Herbert threw 4 interceptions in that game. And one of those interceptions went off Will Dissly's hands. So if you want to say 3, and then, but like you can say a lot of stuff for a lot of different things. So, but like I said, I watched the game, so I know that one of those wasn't his fault. But he did throw 3 other interceptions in that game, and they ended up losing in embarrassing fashion. So you can't put Justin Herbert on Jalen Hurts' level when he isn't able to perform in the playoffs. He's not able to show up. He can't lead his team to wins. And none of these guys that I named, except for Stafford and Jaden Daniels, have had seasons as good as Jalen Hurts has. Jalen Hurts finished second, and he finished runner-up in MVP, and he spent the two Super Bowls in the last 3 years. Justin Herbert hasn't come close to that. Jordan Love hasn't come close to that. C.J. Stroud has not been close to that. He's got to the divisional, but he hasn't had regular seasons as good as Jalen Hurts. Matthew Stafford, he won a Super Bowl in 2021, but since that, he started to decline, and not like a terrible decline, but he's not been as good as he was during that Super Bowl run. He hasn't been at that level. And Jaden Daniels had a really good season. You could argue Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts were the same level of player this year. But the thing is, Jalen Hurts outperformed him twice, if you want to value that. And when it mattered most. And then Jaden Daniels has only been in the league 1 year. So it's hard for me to say, oh, just 1 year and Jaden Daniels is already over a guy who just won Super Bowl MVP. That doesn't make sense. So stop the Jalen Hurts disrespect. There's only 4 quarterbacks in the NFL that's better than Jalen Hurts. That's Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Patrick Mahomes. Jalen Hurts is the 5th best quarterback in the league. Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, C.J. Stroud, they're not on his level. Jaden Daniels has a chance to make it close, especially if he plays like this again next season. And then Matthew Stafford, he's been on the decline since winning the Super Bowl. That's just the truth of the matter. If y'all don't want to see it, like Jalen Hurts, he's improving year by year. Obviously, 2023 it wasn't his best season. Obviously, but every quarterback has their bad seasons. This season is considered Patrick Mahomes' worst season, and he got to the Super Bowl. So, at the end of the day, you have to build a great team to win a Super Bowl, win a championship, World Series, NBA Finals. It don't matter what it is. You're not winning a championship with a bad team. So using help as an argument for why Jalen Hurts can't be a top 5 quarterback is stupid. Saying just putting the rookie over a guy that's been to 2 Super Bowls in 3 years, finished runner-up in MVP, elite dual-threat quarterback. Okay, he's not good under pressure. Lamar Jackson isn't good in the playoffs, and Lamar Jackson is my favorite quarterback. So we can't be making up these excuses when it's about certain guys. Like, it makes no sense that people keep disrespecting Jalen Hurts for being a guy that knows how to win games. Tell Justin Herbert to win a playoff game, and maybe I'll give him some respect, because that's clearly what Justin Herbert isn't able to do. He can't win a playoff game. All the other guys I named, they've won playoff games. So maybe we need to have conversations about Justin Herbert instead of disrespecting Jalen Hurts for being a phenomenal quarterback. But with that being said, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. Let me know where y'all rank Jalen Hurts on the current quarterback list. But that's it for this video. Fly Eagles Fly.